Hello everybody, Connor here, and I'm back with another week of new movie reviews. We finally crossed into the first week of February after a surprisingly not bad January that still produced no good movies that weren't first in limited or foreign release, and there was only one movie this week, Winchester, a period horror starring Helen Mirren and Jason Clarke. This is kind of odd because in years past, there's usually 3 or so releases, and at least one of them serves as the first good movie of the year. Remember, the Lego Movie, Hail Caesar, the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water, Warm Bodies, and the Lego Batman movie were all first week of February releases, and I was worried going into Winchester because it's a first quarter horror movie that wasn't screened for critics. But wait, hold the phone! Super Bowl 52 was held this Sunday, and with it came the bomb that a third Cloverfield movie, which had up until this point been going under the title God Particle and was pulled from its slated theatrical release date earlier this year, called The Cloverfield Paradox, was now not only going to be a Netflix original, but it was also dropping on the site right after the big game. Now, usually I don't get around to even watching Netflix movies. I still have yet to see Beasts of No Nation, The Little Prince, Okja, Gerald's Game, 1922, Mudbound, The Babysitter, Death Note, To the Bone, Bright, any of the Adam Sandler Happy Madison productions, or any Netflix original movies, period. But usually there's more than one movie released in the first week of February, and there's usually a bunch of crap to wade through in January, so I'm going to review the new Cloverfield movie. Before this new release blindsided us all, I was prepared to do a little something since there would be only one movie review. So on top of talking about 2 movies, I'm also going to be giving my thoughts on the recently announced nominations for the 90th Annual Academy Awards and the 37th Annual Golden Raspberry Awards. So today's agenda is going to look like a review of Winchester, followed by a review of the Cloverfield Paradox, then my thoughts on the recently announced Oscar and Razzie nominations, and lastly a look at this weekend's box office results. As always, if you want to jump around the video, then timestamps can be found in the description, and fair warning, spoilers for everything moving forward. The Spierig brothers have been a blip on my radar every so often for a while now. The 2009 film Daybreakers had its fans back when it was released, and the 2014 movie Predestination was extremely popular in niche film communities. I haven't seen either despite wanting to, and I also didn't see their last movie, which is barely over 3 months old at this point, Jigsaw, because, well, it's the 8th Saw movie and I haven't seen any of the 7 prior Saw movies, so why would I see Jigsaw? Regardless, I've been passively wanting to check out Peter and Michael Spierig's work for a little while now, and I was finally able to with this week's early 1900s set haunted house horror movie, Winchester. Or is it Winchester, the House That Ghosts Built? I'm not sure because my ticket stub has the subtitle, but the film doesn't, which stars screen legend Helen Mirren and Jason Clarke. The time is 1906. The place is California. Jason Clarke plays psychiatric doctor Eric Price, who is tapped by a lawyer of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company to perform a psychological evaluation on Sarah Winchester, the inheritor of the gun producer fortune after her husband and company founder died. Mrs. Winchester has been having construction on her house around the clock, 24/7, and the company lawyer wants her evaluated to see if she's in good enough mental health to own the company. Hey, that's Richard from Twin Peaks: The Return. Dr. Price, naturally, has a tragic past and has since turned to drug addiction to cope with his grief, and has also been personally selected by Mrs. Winchester to perform her evaluation. Am I making it clear enough that Dr. Price will be performing a psychological evaluation on Mrs. Winchester? Good, then I'm doing the movie justice. Oh, and ghosts. The film and the marketing let us know that Winchester is, quote, inspired by actual events, unquote, which always gets a chuckle out of me because that could mean anything. Eraserhead, for all I know, could have been inspired by a time when David Lynch took a test in high school, and that description would still apply. I should mention, in case you don't know, that the Winchester Mansion, Sarah Winchester, and the Winchester Repeating Arms Company are all real. The actual Winchester Mansion does contain insane, illogical architecture with no rhyme or reason, including stairs and hallways which lead to nowhere, and a lot of people consider it to be one of the most haunted locations in North America. These events, however, are entirely the work of fiction. Winchester has been getting torn apart by critics, so how did I feel? Well, I didn't hate it, but it was really bad and incredibly boring. Several people walked out of the screening I attended, and I can't really blame them. Firstly, though, I do want to touch on things I liked about this movie because there were some things that I found to be good or potentially good, and it's all in the first 10 to 15 minutes. I didn't like the opening scene, but from Jason Clarke's introduction all the way until he has dinner with Mrs. Winchester and her niece and grandnephew, I thought this might be a movie I'd find myself defending aspects of. I didn't mind the introduction of Clarke's Dr. Price. The scene established him as a bit of a nutty professor, knowledgeable but self-destructive, with his dabbling in psychedelic drugs and womanizing. An archetype, yes, but Clarke's confidence and chill swagger providing a false security kind of set him up as a sort of Tony Stark before the Iron Man armor. There's also an establishment of the theme of control, and it is presented in a neat little way as he illustrates his point with an illusion. Usually this sort of movie would just have him deliver his monologue in a flat close-up, but this shows an understanding of action in its relation to establishing character. Once he gets to the house, there are a couple moments that are unfortunately played for loud, jolting jump scares, but there's a little more creativity than the likes of, say, the latest Insidious movie. A cabinet in Mrs. Winchester's study starts to jiggle, only for it to be revealed to be a maid. Wait, what? That wasn't a cabinet? That was a door in the wall made to look like a cabinet? While the jump scare element is lame, it is a strange thing for there to be an elevated door in somebody's office to a hallway. And this strangeness could have easily been kind of creepy and subliminally created unease had the scene been better handled. Later, there's a moment where Dr. Price is relaxing in his room and the camera observes him through a turning mirror. Obviously, we get the gag with the mirror turning back and forth until boo! But it was a great touch for the entire scene up until the scare to be shot this way. The camera lingers, and Jason Clarke is a good actor. We see him get comfortable, unwind out of the formal facade he's been putting on to make a good impression on the Winchesters. I also liked how that illusion with the dollar bill he used from earlier is paid off. When Dr. Price meets Mrs. Winchester, she sees right through that facade he puts on when he interacts with others. She sees his grief because she's in a constant state of it. We later, and I think way too late, find out about his wife's death at the hands of a Winchester rifle, so his inherent and maybe unintentional anxiety once he's there is immediately met when she calls his bullcrap. I also think that there's a good idea in here of somebody still in grief after the death of a loved one being taken to a place that is essentially a monument to something instrumental in the death of that loved one and the cause of that person's grief. This could have been a really interesting exploration of grief, and specifically the fake face of security one wears in an effort to ignore it. This is where I get into the negatives, because pretty much everything after the first 10 to 15 minutes falls apart entirely. Winchester feels like a movie that didn't even want to be a traditional, scary horror flick, but had to be a jump scare bonanza roller coaster because it only got made because of the Conjuring movie's popularity. There's a real good story in here somewhere about two people helping each other through a dark part of the human experience, and the period setting would have been a nice touch. But no, this character dynamic is shafted early on, like most things in the first act, in favor for a clumsy, stupid, misguided, and confusing PSA that also wants to be a stylistic period gothic horror in a similar vein as the far superior Conjuring movies. That theme of control gets really muddled among the actions of its characters in the climax, practically dropped altogether. Price's bullet is set up all wrong in correspondence with his mysterious backstory, and also in terms of how irrelevant it seems at how early it's introduced. I'm getting way ahead of myself, and I need to pace this out. The first problem with Winchester is how it sets itself up in the first scene as a movie with ghosts and then tries to play the whole ghost element as this may be or maybe not be happening in the heads of her main characters. Sarah Winchester has inherited the fortune of a gun company, as well as the gun company feels an alarming amount of guilt and responsibility for the death her company's product has caused, and as a result requested that construction be performed on her house to build rooms for the ghosts of those killed by Winchester rifles who she claims haunt the house. Not only that, but Sarah personally chooses Dr. Price to evaluate her because he died for 3 minutes at the hands of a Winchester rifle, maybe as a form of penance. That sounds crazy. It's no wonder everyone thinks she's crazy. I think that's crazy. This could have been a neat little character evaluation mystery with Dr. Price as our POV. Not only could they have gone with that mystery route, but Dr. Price in his grief has turned to psychedelic hallucinogenics, and the movie could have had a trippy psychedelic angle to the maybe or maybe not ghosts thing. Or Dr. Price's withdrawals from the absence of his drugs could be leading him to question whether or not this house is haunted by ghosts or not. Instead, the movie shoots itself in the foot right out of the gate with a possessed kid, temporary blank eyes, and sleepwalking. Gee, are there any ghosts? This sure is a mystery. There's also a distinct lack of focus in Winchester. The prospect of viewing this from Sarah being maybe not crazy, and Dr. Price not being able to tell if the ghosts are real or a hallucination are briefly touched upon early in the movie, but pushed to the side quickly. If the movie did stick to those as possibilities, then they weren't communicated well to the audience in the slightest. What the film ultimately decides to be about after beating around the bush for half the movie is gun violence. A servant at the Winchester mansion, played by Richard from Twin Peaks, is revealed to be the violent, angry ghost of a former Civil War Confederate soldier hell-bent on revenge after his brothers were killed on the battlefield, who's been the cause of the evil, ghostly shenanigans the whole time. This whole concept is botched in execution. Richard from Twin Peaks hates the Winchesters because they made the guns that won the Civil War, so his big plan is to kill Sarah Winchester with Winchester rifles. This is so poorly thought out. I get that we're trying to do a poetic justice thing, but having the villain unironically using the weapon he specifically hates to kill the widow of the man who started the company, which created the gun, is really sloppy. Why does Richard from Twin Peaks hate the Winchester gun specifically? It's brought up earlier that it's the superior gun on the market, but had the Union been using any other gun and still won the war, would Richard from Twin Peaks have shot up that gun shop and continued his vengeance against the owner of that gun company after death? Being fixated on the gun of the opposing army is so strange and a matter of convenience for this situation. It feels like a fun fact made into a dramatic story point. Batman and Superman's mothers share the same name. The North used Winchester rifles in the American Civil War. Richard from Twin Peaks doesn't seem to be angry at the Union Army, the new country that had adopted the North's morals, or anything that would logically anger the ghost of a Southern soldier. Wars are fought with guns. What did he think was gonna happen? On top of this, Sarah Winchester is very much against guns and feels guilt over the pain her company's product has caused, and the day is saved using guns, and she's more than okay with it. Also weird about this climax is Dr. Price's bullet. We're given his backstory, far too late, that his wife suffered some kind of mental illness and tried to kill herself with a Winchester rifle that Dr. Price tried to take from her hands. In the struggle, he was shot and died for 3 minutes, and in those 3 minutes, she took her life. After he recovered, Dr. Price kept the bullet and got it refurbished so it has a new casing and can be used again. The film also explains that this bullet is the representation of his grief. In the climax, when Dr. Price is trying to shoot the ghost of Richard from Twin Peaks, bullets fail, but then Dr. Price uses this thematically relevant bullet and it saves the day. I get that this is trying to be thematically resonant, but it fails on both a thematic and practical level. Firstly, how is this bullet within the inner logic of this movie different than any other bullet? It's not laced with anything, and it's made of lead and gunpowder. It's just, physically, a normal bullet. Secondly, this fails to resonate thematically. If the bullet is meant to represent Dr. Price's grief, then how does it kill the ghost of somebody who doesn't know anything or care about Dr. Price? I also don't understand weaponizing grief in an effort to let it go. How does the evil ghost represent an obstacle for Dr. Price to overcome on any thematic level? This is just stupid. Is the movie pro-gun or anti-gun? Why have discussions about the nature of guns if you're going to have a contradictory message? Other things about the climax that don't work for me are Sarah Winchester's niece and grandnephew. The movie has basically nothing for them to do except be terrorized by a bunch of angry ghosts at the end that haven't been in the movie at all up until this point. Why are they angry? Sarah Winchester's niece making a stand as a mother and choosing not to be scared is so out of place. The movie has not been about that, and her big moment only gets in the way of the natural flow of the climax. Everything involving her son, and the ghosts do, for that matter. Now I have to talk about the mansion's greenhouse. Ghosts possess Mrs. Winchester, happen to be master architecture artists, and draw rooms that they want to be at peace in after they are killed by a Winchester gun. Dr. Price's wife apparently did the same and had Mrs. Winchester rebuild the Price greenhouse as her final resting place. Early on, this catches the attention of Dr. Price, and he tries to get in periodically throughout the movie. In the climax, when time is of the essence and he has to rescue Mrs. Winchester from the ghost of Richard from Twin Peaks, he takes the time to burst into the greenhouse, from what I can tell, to see if the ghost of the dead wife is living in this room. She is, and then we get his backstory. This whole plot point was just here to pad out the runtime and for us to get a dramatic reveal that is structurally counterintuitive. This reveal is a few minutes long and puts the immediate threat on the back burner, disrupting the momentum of the story. This reveal doesn't really add much that we haven't already been able to gather, and should have been earlier in the movie if we're going to do it at all. Another thing that's confusing here is the big earthquake. Is the movie trying to say that the angry ghost of a Confederate soldier caused the San Francisco 1906 earthquake? Or is the movie conveying that this angry ghost miraculously has the power to use the force and throw people around just as earthquake is happening? Goodness, the rules of this movie are confusing. Speaking of rules, let's break them down. Poor Helen Mirren is given practically nothing to do besides be a mouthpiece to exposit and talk like a Jedi Master. What does she mean by the ghost of Richard from Twin Peaks disrupting the balance in the house? Firstly, 13 is a holy number for some arbitrary reason, and once a ghost is in the room, they must seal the door with 13 nails. Except when there's a side door fashioned as a wardrobe, then it's good with 13 hooks for whatever reason. It also doesn't have to be a door. It's any opening in the room, like when Dr. Price has to use those nails and a display case to close the hole in the ground. Okay, then there's the whole matter of those killed with Winchester guns specifically coming to her, possessing her body to design their dream rooms so they can be at peace. This is where I'm confused about the movie being pro or anti-gun. This seems to insinuate that victims of gun violence are not at rest, but then they shoot an evil ghost to death with a non-magical bullet, and now all of a sudden he's at peace. What? Do ghosts kill themselves in their dream rooms, or can they never be at peace unless they do kill themselves after? Oh my goodness, this all gets really messy when they start killing ghosts. All of this would be so much easier if Helen Mirren just gave into her grief, used her majority share to dissolve the company, and feel better about herself for making the world, as she would see it, a better place. Except that can't happen because that's not how it happened in real life. This is where the fiction and mythology of Winchester clashes with the reality it's based on in a way that harms the story at play. There's no logical reason that Sarah Winchester wouldn't dissolve her company and relieve herself of responsibility for the ghosts. The production is a mixed bag. What we get looks decent, not particularly good, but not bad, and it's well stylized enough, but the limitations start to show quickly. We only ever get one outside set with the same extras. The CG mansion lacks detail and looks more like a high-end video game as a result, and we only ever get a handful of indoor sets that we revisit time and time again. For a large, winding mansion, we sure only seem to see the same 6 rooms and 3 hallways a lot, but the period detail is pretty good, only, if you don't venture too far outside. Getting into smaller stuff, this movie just isn't scary. The scares are few and far between, and always the most familiar tricks in the book in ways that feel obligatory and uninspired. The movie can never seem to figure out what it is, then it remembers that it's supposed to be a horror movie. Boo! Those roller skates were always hilarious, though. Jason Clarke is a good actor who's failed to really hit it big, and we can see he's a good actor in those first 10 to 15 minutes, before he has to be a stock leading man in a horror movie removed of all personality with generic pathos. He gets out better than Helen Mirren, though, who only speaks in exposition and never gets the chance to spread her acting wings, what she's famous for. In the end, Winchester was a really, really bad movie. Its final act makes no sense, and the first 2 acts are endlessly boring. I fought off sleep in this one. Some promise in the opening 10 minutes or so, and some decent elements of the production can't overcome a PG-13 horror movie with no scares that land, an obviously limited production, and a completely inept story all across the board. I'm giving Winchester a 3 out of 10. Cloverfield was something that had eluded me for the longest time. That first movie was released in January of 2008 when I was a 7th grade middle school student, and I remember there being a lot of hype surrounding that without being knowledgeable about the viral marketing and without understanding the reasons it was so hotly anticipated. My family had still not gotten an internet provider. Online forums were something for me to still discover. I rarely saw movies at the theater, so I never saw a trailer, but I remember the chatter about classmates and family friends, and I remember seeing ads on TV quite often. What was this thing that people were so excited for? It just looked like a monster movie in the found footage tradition of the Blair Witch Project. Don't get me wrong, I liked me a giant monster movie. Godzilla was and remains one of my great loves. But it was just strange to see so many people get worked up about something that seemed so routine for me. It just looked like a giant monster attacks the city, which I was less interested in compared to monsters punching other monsters. And then Cloverfield came out and it was just a monster movie in the found footage tradition of the Blair Witch Project, and everybody seemed to hate it. Oh, Cloverfield is so lame. Oh, Cloverfield is just a stupid monster movie. What was the big deal with Cloverfield? I heard this for about a year after its release, and I never saw it. I heard a lot about it way back when, and I continue to see that monster every once in a while, and that movie certainly has its fans, but it wasn't until a couple days ago when I finally saw it. I actually saw 10 Cloverfield Lane twice in the theater without ever seeing the original, and that was a quasi-follow-up that came out over 8 years later. It was great, too. Still, that didn't give me any motivation to go back. Sometime afterward, I had heard that a science fiction movie in development called God Particle starring David Oyelowo was revealed to secretly be Cloverfield 3, and I was excited that it was coming out so soon. Then, a couple months ago or so, God Particle got removed from its release slate to my confusion. And finally, on Super Bowl Sunday, this past Sunday, there was a TV spot that not only revealed God Particle's true title, now called The Cloverfield Paradox, but it would be a Netflix original movie, and not only that, but it would be dropping on the site that very night. This was insane. 10 Cloverfield Lane caught everybody off guard with its announcement trailer coming out a little over a month before its release, but this was a whole new level of crazy marketing. Before I talk about the movie, I want to say I am so glad I do these things with spoilers, because when it comes to these Cloverfield movies and their fan base, I can never tell what constitutes a spoiler, since even details regarding the very premise can be considered such. The story this time around revolves around the Cloverfield space station and its crew, who are working desperately to create a new, infinite energy source for Earth, which is on the brink of a breakdown as it experiences an energy crisis. One day, when the crew is finally able to create the perfect formula, the space station and the crew are sent into an alternate reality, discovering a lost member of this alternate reality's crew of the Cloverfield in their walls, and try to get back home as the resources run dangerously low. This is the second feature film to be directed by Julius Ona and features the incredible cast of character actors comprised of Gugu Mbatha-Raw, David Oyelowo, Daniel Bruhl, Chris O'Dowd, John Ortiz, Ziyi Zhang, and Elizabeth Debicki. Holy crap, has the backlash for this movie been bad. People hate the Cloverfield Paradox. I didn't think it was bad. Sure, I wouldn't come close to calling this good, but it was just a weak link, like the Incredible Hulk for the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, whose trademark characteristic is mediocrity, and is especially disappointing when compared to its predecessors. The two key problems present here are both in the screenplay, which is the apparent worst thing about this movie, those being the expository dialogue and the lack of restraint in concepts. Both prior Cloverfield movies have taken formulas that have been worn to the bone by time and present them in fresh ways through immaculate execution. Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane are excellently directed films, more than capable of elevating the often creaky material on the page. The Cloverfield Paradox, like the two previous films, is centered around a hallmark science fiction premise. However, despite its decent direction, the storytelling aspects of Ona's approach never mask the consistent laziness of Oren Uziel's script, but we'll get to those storytelling directorial choices later. Right now, let's focus on the story as it's presented. The opening scene is rough, mostly because of the dialogue. Mbatha-Raw's character, Hamilton, and her husband, Michael, are sitting in their car waiting in line for gas, and all of the things they say to one another is something both of them already know, and their conversation is for the sole benefit of the audience. Dialogue is supposed to progress a story, but it should feel natural between the two people sharing the dialogue. For example, if I were to go to lunch with a friend and we were to both order burgers, I wouldn't tell my friend an hour after lunch, "Hey, I had a burger for lunch today," because I assume this is information he would already know. And this scene starts out decent enough, with Hamilton asking how far traffic has moved ahead since she's just getting back from a cell phone call, and playfully honks the horn. But then the power goes out and everything goes wrong. "Oh, come on, that's like the 4th blackout today," Hamilton says, to which Michael replies with 5. This is solely for the benefit of the audience. You know what would have given the viewer the exact same information as well as felt more natural? If, when the power goes out, Hamilton were to sigh and say, "Again," then I don't know, Michael could be keeping a tally and we see that there have been 5 blackouts. The entire conversation that transpires feels this way, as they talk about her having to go into space to be a part of the particle accelerator crew on the Cloverfield space station. Then there's a montage of the 2-ish years the crew of the Cloverfield spend trying to figure out how to get the particle accelerator working just right, interspersed with the opening credits. Following this montage is a dialogue scene between Hamilton and Michael, which ends in their communication breaking down and Hamilton caressing her window, which has a picture of her family projected onto it. Title card. I can't help but feel like this opening 10 minutes could have been better served as a dialogue-free montage. Establish Hamilton and her husband, the blackouts, cut to her on the space station hard at work, the days passing, her online connections with her husband, maybe see a little of Michael's life on Earth without her as he goes to hospital for work. Then one of their conversations ends in a signal break, then end with that visual of her against the window. I say all this because the visual we end on is a strong one, but it feels out of place in a melodramatic way in comparison to the rest of the opening 10 minutes. Had the rest of this opening been more stylized like that image, I think this could have been an elegant, classy opening. Now that I'm thinking about it, that may have invited comparisons to the opening of 10 Cloverfield Lane, but hey, poetry and rhyming and all that, right? This movie is also too short for its own good, and this can be felt right after the opening when these scientists have been working and living in such close proximity for so long and tensions are running high. Rather than organically building character and drama, the movie takes the easy route and resorts to two of the men getting into a fist fight. This is such a cheap and easy way to make the audience think that what they're watching is more dramatic than it actually is. Rather than taking time to earn that moment, the movie pushes the easy button. Oh wow, things must be getting really intense. They're punching each other. I don't know who these people are, what their names are, their little personality quirks, or anything. The only thing I know is that Russian guy doesn't like that German guy who's dating that Chinese lady. And then they start punching. I'm not going to continue to break this movie down scene by scene, but I think a lot of the problems of this movie can be noticed right out of the gate. A continuing problem with this movie is the approach to character. For a comparison, let's go back to Ridley Scott's original sci-fi horror, Alien. Like all subsequent entries into this subgenre such as Life, Event Horizon, and, well, all the other movies in the Alien franchise, the Cloverfield Paradox owes a great debt to that classic and is extremely derivative. Looking back at the original monster movie in space, that movie established character in a way that was subtle and took its time. The camera is so observatory, the characters feel like real people sitting around a table as they talk over one another, and the viewer can choose to listen to whatever one of the multiple conversations that are happening simultaneously. The magic and romance of going to space has all been but stripped away. They're basically space truckers doing their job and complaining about bonuses. No character is really given a backstory or traditional character arc. Instead, we understand each character and how they're perceived by the other characters, our opinions of each person formed by what we're told by the other crew members. If you gravitate towards Parker and Brett, then you probably thought Ripley was a cold, raging pain in the butt. Maybe you gravitated towards Ripley and thought all the other crew members were lazy, willfully ignorant losers. In the case of the Cloverfield Paradox, I can't help but feel it's trying to bring to mind Alien with its characters. The plot calls for getting caught up in the immediate threat, like the first Cloverfield, so most of our characters are developed through the actions they take in the moment. I don't know anything about David Oyelowo's character at first, besides him being the captain, but through his actions I see that he is a level-headed thinker under pressure with a list of priorities and protocols, and he knows exactly how to lead when things begin to break down and when people start to die. He knows he's the captain and is willing to sacrifice himself for the benefit of his crew when the situation calls for it, because he will not put other members of his crew at risk if he is willing to go first. Kind of like Dallas from the first Alien, who breaks protocol in order to try and save Kane. And this could be said for other characters, like Daniel Bruhl being against David Oyelowo's plans and going behind his back to pull off a different plan that he feels would better benefit the crew. Chris O'Dowd, who's the comedy relief who goes along with whatever he's told because he gets along with everybody, and I could go on down the line. The only person of the initial crew who doesn't fit this mold is Hamilton, our lead who's set up in a prologue and has the connection to Earth that we see. With her being the focus for the first 10 minutes, it makes that alien-style observatory approach to character feel out of place once we start doing that 10 minutes into the movie. After the title card, Hamilton just feels like another member of the crew, but because we already know her so much better than the rest of the crew, it plays as a disservice to the rest of the crew. This is the reason why that punching so early on is bad storytelling, because it tries in that moment to cheat character drama with characters we've never met before. Either set your 3 or 4 principal characters up in a similar way to how you set up Hamilton, making your movie about 20 minutes longer, or drop us into their situation cold turkey and have us figure these people out for ourselves. This movie tries to have it both ways, and I think it fails because I don't get a good read on most of these people until they start dying. For example, the reason Kane's death in Alien works so well is not because he's some deep character, but because I understand enough of his personality and what he means to his crew members who worried for him when the facehugger was on him. In the Cloverfield Paradox, what can I say about the Russian guy whose death is a clear homage to Kane's death from Alien? He didn't like Daniel Bruhl because tensions were running high, I guess. That's all I'm feeling towards him. Then he gets worms and blows up. This is a good segue into another key issue I have: the lack of restraint on the screenwriter's part. The Cloverfield Paradox just doesn't really seem to be interested in telling a story, as it takes its premise and goes crazy like a kid in a candy shop, coming across like fan fiction, with characters speaking lines that include the likes of multiverse, crossing dimensions, alternate realities, and the like. Not that that's an inherently amateur way of writing science fiction, but all of those things are spoken by these scientists like they're shared vocabulary words in a course one takes before going onto a space station. One person is watching Donal Logue on a news broadcast talking about his book, The Cloverfield Paradox, and how it could tear a hole in space and time and how alternate dimensions and realities could collide in on themselves. David Oyelowo dismisses these claims by telling someone to turn the news off, and this tells us that these people don't believe in Donal Logue's claims. Then Donal Logue's claims happen, and now everybody's talking like they've read his book. But now I'm getting away from my point. Cloverfield was a stream of consciousness sensory experience which used its familiar premise to bring to screen American, more specifically New York's, post 9/11 fears of another but now bigger attack we weren't prepared for just as we were beginning to move on. It also served as a way of bringing to screen the fear of war coming to American soil, and it did this effectively by creating a visceral, adrenaline-fueled, and, in its own way, terrifying atmosphere of chaos and pandemonium. Yes, the stock, tired characters needed to make stupid choices that work due to an absurd string of conveniences, but that movie works because its thematic story and intent was aimed more on the personal level of the viewer. By contrast, 10 Cloverfield Lane is a movie with a familiar setup that is a decidedly more character-driven narrative than the original, as its story is more about a woman learning to escape her personal prison of non-commitment. She learns to not run away from her problems. Under this level is the subtext of the monsters we become if our faults take us over, like John Goodman's Howard, and how any one of our neighbors can be damaged. The Cloverfield Paradox attempts to follow suit with a familiar setup that is the premise of a lot of space station science fiction. A human story is also attempted with Hamilton's family and the death of her children and the conflict she faces as this universe's Ava Hamilton still has children who are alive. This is without a doubt what I consider to be the best thing about the movie. But I just don't think it makes up enough of this movie, since the movie can never balance its character drama with its space monster premise. The movie seems far more interested in the comic book sci-fi concepts of multiverses and alternate dimensions and things teleporting into people and evil walls and evil magnetic poles and arms with minds of their own and other crazy wacky set pieces. While I'm here, I have to talk about another point. The movie clumsily exposits what will happen in the movie right before it happens, then presents a series of events without any explanation. Donal Logue is conveniently talking about alternate realities, a rift in all of time and space, then, miraculously, we get just that. Now, at first I thought it was kind of neat that there was an author who was talking about alternate realities on the news because of a book he had written. Thought it was a cute bit of foreshadowing, and then we cut away. Well, we did cut away, but then we cut back, and this was no longer cute. It was bad foreshadowing. This force feeds the information to the audience, holding our hand so we're not too confused when they cross dimensions. This is where the movie conveys to us that the movie is not about anything that won't be broken down for the audience. And because of this, I have no idea if this movie knows what happens in space. I just gotta come out and put my question out there. is the space station a monster? Or is there just some unexplained evil cosmic force that wants to kill our crew because this force knows that it's the villain in a science fiction horror movie? Chinese lady dies because a room fills with water then freezes. Chris O'Dowd gets his arm removed because magic wall, then dies because the magnetic field manipulates to get him with that seal he's been using to repair damages. When Russian guy gets the worms in him, he seems to be talking to something in his head that we can't hear. And then Chris O'Dowd's arm has a mind of its own and wants to help. Is it a new friendly cosmic force? Why isn't it evil like everything else? Because this movie explains everything, I don't think those who made this movie even care what is going on here and just want to have fun putting these set pieces into the story. And this was just confusing to me. Where's Donald Logue when you need him? Furthermore, I don't know what's going on with the structure of this movie. It's just too short for its character work and not long enough for the familiar space horror plot. We get the concepts established, do some weird scares and stuff, but then the movie realizes it only has 20 or so minutes left and then just starts killing people off because that's what kind of movie it is. Then the movie runs out of weird sci-fi things to kill people with and has Elizabeth Debicki start shooting people. But enough with the negatives, because there were things I liked in the Cloverfield Paradox. While this is definitely my pick for the weakest of the three in terms of direction, I wouldn't call it a poorly directed movie. Sure, there are many scenes that feel like high-end TV with the amount of close-ups and medium shots, and the lack of wide coverage in scenes make you feel the budget in a way you didn't in 10 Cloverfield Lane, but I was nonetheless entertained by the movie. While not anything to write home about, the staging of the Cloverfield Paradox is effective enough in conveying its thrills. I particularly like the sequence where David Oyelowo, Gugu, Mbatha-Raw, and John Ortiz have to disconnect the lower rotating thing. While I'm here, I really like the design of the space station, and the art direction, set design, and costume design were all solid across the board. It does possess a similar sheen of similar movies, but it kind of has to because this is a NASA space station, and we know what a NASA space station looks like. There nevertheless is just enough of a difference on a visual level here to where I could pick it from a lineup of science fiction movies. Regardless of its noticeable limitations, the Cloverfield Paradox is a good-looking movie. I also remember liking Bear McCreary's score. I couldn't hum a melody from it, but I remember liking it as I was watching the movie. The big standout for me as well was the acting. Obviously. This cast is ridiculously good. Gugu Mbatha-Raw is great in the lead, given pushing close-ups that put her on display without a safety net, and she sells the hell out of her character's dilemma. In the hands of a lesser actor, this whole part of the movie would have felt like a needless element, but it's because of Mbatha-Raw's performance that I care about Hamilton at all, and it's also because of her that I wish her story was more of the movie. She's charismatic, seems like a real person when her character's doing work, and I found her vulnerable, emotional monologue at the end to be moving. As I mentioned earlier, David Oyelowo was really good too. He isn't given much to do besides be a no-nonsense leader, which is kind of a shame if you've ever seen him in anything else and know just how cool he can be, but Oyelowo puts in an honest effort and it works. Chris O'Dowd was my biggest worry at the start, as I was worrying that his comedic relief would kill any momentum. But I didn't mind him at all. I understand why everybody likes him with his friendly demeanor. And while I'm not sure what accent he's trying to wrestle, I liked his delivery and his comedic one-liners felt natural. I'd guarantee someone in the situations he's put in would say something along the lines of what he said. Elizabeth Debicki is quickly becoming one of my favorite character actresses. Alongside playing the villain in this, she was also the villain in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and was an adversarial presence in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. She continues her work of cold, detached, and totally down with murder, and is a pro at this by now. The rest of the cast is game. It's always great to see Daniel Bruhl, and while I wish they had more to do, that doesn't take away from their efforts. Lastly, I want to say that I like this whole Cloverfield thing as a concept. I guess there are fans who believe this movie killed the overarching narrative and mystery of these loose stories, but I don't care because that part of the experiment is the least interesting for me. I know I just got to the party, and people have needlessly and pointlessly speculated at these movies for years, but what I like about Cloverfield is how it's a series of neat little thematically linked stories that serve as giving up-and-coming directors a bigger platform to show off their storytelling prowess. It's basically a film franchise in the vein of The Twilight Zone, and you gotta throw in slusho and monsters and the word Cloverfield in there somewhere just to have some Easter eggs and thematically connected tissue on an aesthetic level. It's fun. There's a fourth one coming this October, in theaters, and it will be set in World War II. I'm looking forward to it. The whole point of J.J. Abrams' mystery box approach to storytelling is that it's a perpetual tease. There's not really an answer at the bottom of the hole, and it's more about the stories you encounter along the way. So long as they don't make 3 stinkers in a row that are more concerned with ironing out the superfluous mythology, then I'll be happy getting fun anthologies. I wouldn't call the Cloverfield Paradox a bad movie, just an underwhelming and rather disappointing one, especially in contrast to the previous 2. As I said before, I see this more as a weak link, and continue to be interested in seeing what comes next because they seem to be going full steam ahead on this franchise. Great performances, a decent if familiar premise, and entertaining set pieces are unfortunately cancelled out by a weak screenplay that doesn't know how to explain anything in a natural way and is more concerned with crazy shenanigans than characters, and the serviceable direction is unable to elevate the material. I'm going to give the Cloverfield Paradox a 5 out of 10. Recently, we got the nominees for the upcoming 90th Academy Awards, the Best in Film, as well as the nominees for the 37th Annual Golden Raspberry Awards, the Worst in Film. I'm not going to go through each category nominee by nominee, but I will provide my thoughts on the overall shape of things, as well as some surprises and notable mentions. Academy Awards. This year was pretty alright in terms of the general getting it right. Sure, I think it's a crime that Blade Runner 2049 was snubbed in all the major categories I wanted it to get recognition for. I found it to be a far superior film than Villeneuve's previous Oscar contender Arrival, but outside of Call Me By Your Name, I got no beef with any of the Best Picture nominees. I think it's kind of cool that both Get Out and The Shape of Water got some Best Picture love, since fantasy and horror are generally ignored this time of year. I'm extremely happy that Phantom Thread snuck in there because I thought that would be considered too weird for Academy voters. Of all the nominees, my favorite movie is 3 Billboards, but I'd also be okay if The Shape of Water, Get Out, or Dunkirk were to win, which I find Dunkirk winning doubtful. I liked Lady Bird, but I think it's the weak link here in terms of technical quality, and think it's cool Darkest Hour and The Post got in there, even though I don't want them to win. Best Director and Best Lead Actress are the 2 stacked categories for me this year. It's really cool to see Christopher Nolan finally get nominated, and I'm elated to see Paul Thomas Anderson take a spot that I was worried would go to Martin McDonagh. I liked his direction in 3 Billboards, but that's clearly a movie that came together due to the actors and the writing. Guillermo del Toro is clearly striking me as the winner, because everybody in the industry loves him, and The Shape of Water was great and seems to be loved on the award circuit. Seems like his year. I think it's kind of ridiculous that Greta Gerwig got a director nomination, but Lady Bird didn't get a nomination for Best Editing, but I'll get to that later. Best Lead Actress is a ridiculously stacked category, as the best 4 leading ladies this year are so close in quality that I'd be happy with any of them not named Meryl Streep were to win. I think Frances McDormand is going to win for 3 Billboards, all signs seem to be heading that way, but my personal favorite was Saoirse Ronan in Lady Bird, if by a hair. But I can totally see Margot Robbie or Sally Hawkins walking away with that award, and I'd be more than okay if that were to happen. Best Actor is an interesting category since we all know Gary Oldman has this thing in the bag, which I think he deserves, but Daniel Day-Lewis is also here, and he's, well, Daniel Day-Lewis. I don't understand why people are losing their collective minds over Timothée Chalamet and Call Me By Your Name. I thought he was just fine, and Denzel Washington's nomination is absurd to me because Roman J. Israel Esquire was not a good movie, and it was the weakest Denzel performance I can recall because that character never quite resonated on screen. It's cool to see Daniel Kaluuya here, though. I like that guy. For me, though, if we were going to unjustly snub James Franco and The Disaster Artist, then why didn't we get Hugh Jackman in here for Logan? Allison Janney is looking to run away with that Best Supporting Actress award. Sam Rockwell is looking to run away with that Best Supporting Actor award, but I still got my eye on Willem Dafoe and Richard Jenkins. It's cool that Logan and The Big Sick got Best Adapted Screenplay nominations, although I am a little bummed that Holly Hunter didn't nab a Best Supporting Actress nod. I couldn't tell you who's going to win Best Original Screenplay between Get Out and Three Billboards. It is ridiculous, stupid, and absurd that the Best Animated Film, the Lego Batman movie, wasn't nominated for Best Animated Feature. Why the Academy doesn't like these wonderful Lego movies is beyond me, and Best Original Song is a blank fart this year. Best Editing is a showdown between Baby Driver and Dunkirk, and I don't even know which one I thought was better. I was correct in my prediction that Baby Driver would get exactly 3 nominations for Best Film Editing, Best Sound Editing, and Best Sound Mixing, and I think it's really silly that the third best edited film, Lady Bird, didn't get a nomination in this category. This may be Roger Deakins' year for Best Cinematography after, 14 nominations? But I wouldn't hold my breath. Looking at Blade Runner 2049's lack of love, I find it doubtful. Best Musical Score should go to Johnny Greenwood for Phantom Thread, but that's another solid category this year, and how on earth did Phantom Thread not get any attention for sound mixing? All things considered, I don't really care about the Oscars because the last thing it's really about are the movies. Sing Street didn't get a single nomination for Best Original Song last year after all, but they always spur a fun discussion. Golden Raspberry Awards. The Golden Raspberry Awards, often shortened to Razzies, is a fun idea that usually divulges into disappointing indulgence. In a year where a lot of bad movies can come out and so many of them are bad for a multitude of different reasons, it's always a shame that they go for the lowest hanging fruits, only the highest profile stinkers. On top of that, they're more committed to piling onto a movie rather than thinking about who were the absolute worst in each category. For example, Josh Duhamel is nominated this year for Worst Supporting Actor in Transformers: The Last Knight. Yes, I hated that movie and it was among the worst movies of the year, but why nominate Josh Duhamel? He wasn't noteworthy in that movie. The Worst Supporting Actor category was especially egregious this year since they also nominated Javier Bardem for both Mother and Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales. I also hated the last Pirates movie, but Javier Bardem was easily, no bones about it, the best thing in that disaster, and he was awesome in Mother. Speaking of that movie, Darren Aronofsky was nominated for Worst Director and Jennifer Lawrence was nominated for Worst Actress. I get that the Razzies are comedic by nature, but what on earth is going on here? I thought Mother was just okay, but it was excellently directed, and Jennifer Lawrence is closer to the Best Actress side of the spectrum on that movie. How many times are we going to nominate Tyler Perry for Worst Actress because Medea is a female character? This joke isn't funny anymore. But like I said, the Razzies tend to go for the easiest of targets. Resident Evil: The Final Chapter redefined what a bad movie could be to me, and it was completely ignored, as was the abominable Black Hat a couple years ago. And that movie had Chris Hemsworth and was directed by a respected director. Perfect stuff. All that being said, Transformers: The Last Knight, The Emoji Movie, The Mummy, Baywatch, and 50 Shades Darker are all among the worst of the year and deserve their spots as Worst Picture nominees. Most nominees I can't bring myself to disagree with either, such as Anthony Hopkins in Collide and Transformers, and everything that got flung at The Mummy. At the box office, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle came back to the top spot after last week's hiatus. This is the 7th week of this movie's release. That's crazy. We just can't get rid of this movie, can we? Star Wars: The Last Jedi was out of the top 10 by the time it got to week 7, and Jumanji is still coming in first place. Anyways, Welcome to the Jungle made an added $10.9 million to its haul, now at $352.5 million domestically on a relatively slim $90 million budget. Worldwide, the Jumanji sequel is at around $857 million. Barely dropping down to second place in its second week is the trilogy-ending Maze Runner: The Death Cure, grossing $10.4 million and dipping 56.7% from last week. Debuting in third is the horror movie Winchester, making $9.3 million. A budget has yet to be announced, but if I had to wager a guess, I'd say the movie cost somewhere between $10 to $20 million, and I can imagine this is a bit of a disappointing debut given the talent involved. Maintaining its fourth place status was The Greatest Showman, raking in $7.6 million, keeping true to form and dipping only 19.4% from last week's earnings. Also staying in the same position as they were in last week is The Post. Steven Spielberg's latest made an additional $5.2 million in fifth place, which is a 42.7% drop from last week. Hostels came in 6th this week, dropping 49.5% down from 3rd place last week at a domestic gross of $5.1 million. As the pattern continues, 12 Strong finished hairs above Den of Thieves in 7th and 8th place respectively. The former made $4.7 million, while the latter made $4.5 million. In 9th place was Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water with $4.4 million, dipping almost 25% from last week despite adding 487 theaters to its count. And wrapping up the top 10 is the endlessly charming and wonderful Paddington 2 with $3.2 million. And I think this is where we say goodbye to good old Paddington from the top 10. You're doing the Lord's work, Bear. All things considered, this was a really low-earning week. Compared to this weekend last year, there was a dip of 11.8%, which was already down 35.1% from the previous year. Well, that'll do it for me this week. Whew, what a big episode. I was expecting this to be a lot shorter. Next week we're getting a lot more movies with 3 theatrical wide releases in the kinky romantic trilogy capper 50 Shades Freed, the live-action talking animal movie Peter Rabbit, and the latest offering from Clint Eastwood, the 1517 to Paris. I'm kind of interested in one of those. We'll tune back in next week, and until then, I'll see you at the movies.